today we're going to be speaking about something that we have very close personal experience with, is dealing with letting agents, and do we really need a letting agent to manage our buy-to-let investment property for us, whether that's a normal buy-to-let, HMO, or even a short let. But yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So we'll kick things off with Matt. Why don't you explain the role of what a letting agent does?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously good to be on a new episode, first of all, Toby. And yeah, in regards to a letting agent, there's a couple of ways. I think you've kind of just mentioned it slightly there. So you've got a couple of options and ways you can utilise a letting agent. And to be fair, you can have them at different stages to kind of how involved they can be with the property. So you've got a lot of the time a standard letting agent will kind of be able to take on your property for you and fully manage it. A lot of the investors, especially that we deal with, and I know me and yourself haven't got the time, not a lot of the time, to be able to deal with properties on a day-to-day basis, as well as obviously having your own job or having to be here, there or everywhere. So in regards to that, they're able to kind of fully manage it. A lot of the time they'll get a tenant in there, they'll do all the reference checks to make sure, of course, that the tenant is going to be able to pay the rent. They do obviously all the background checks to make sure they've had that kind of good experience behind them, essentially. And yeah, what they'll do is they'll charge a monthly fee, and they'll kind of just take care. A lot of the time they'll do maybe quarterly check-ins to see how the tenant's getting on, and they'll report back to you as the landlord or landlady to kind of let you know, if there's any issues or anything that the tenants want to relay that. So they're kind of the middleman in a way. They kind of take over rather than having to deal with the tenant yourself as such, which, as I'm sure you would have heard, and we've heard of a few stories where that can be quite difficult and challenging when dealing with a tenant directly. So in a nutshell, that's on a standard AST, long-term let. We have obviously a lot of investors now are hearing about the kind of urge, and a lot more people are going towards this short-term let route, which of course you can put it on sites like Airbnb, Booking.com, which is becoming very popular now. And there are actually management companies that do that as well, which I don't think everyone actually knows.
No.
Which we are starting to see a lot of investors nowadays, especially within Track Capital. When we're speaking with investors, they're wanting to know a bit more about that side of things, because you are able to generate obviously sometimes higher incomes depending on the location. So yeah, it's exciting. So I would say obviously in a nutshell, that's an overall to what extent to have the letting agents. Obviously it could be very hands-on to the point where you pay a higher fee, or sometimes a less fee when you even just sometimes want them to just do maybe the reference checks at first.
I think, so you touched on it there. So there are different levels of service, like you mentioned. And just to sort of clarify for any listeners that don't know, that really with a standard letting agent, you'll have 3 levels of service.
Yes.
You have let only. So that's literally where you just employ them to rent the property out for you. Now, what they usually do on that basis is they'll take a one-off fee at the point of letting the property out. And that'll maybe be a percentage of a certain portion of the rent, maybe the year's rent, whatever's agreed. So that's just one-off fee. They rent the property out, then you have to run it, you have to collect the rent, you have to manage it.
What are they doing in a nutshell there? They're literally just getting the tenant.
So they're advertising the property. So they'll do all they can do all the reference check stills, they can do the check-in, everything like that. So they basically, as it says, they rent it out for you. That's it. So rent only, or let only as it's called, they literally just let it out for you. Then they step away, and then you have to deal with everything from then on. So that will be the continuation of keeping up to date with regulations, gas safety checks, electrical checks, whatever's needed. You'll have then to carry that on while that tenant's in there. You'll have to collect the rent, obviously make sure the rent's being collected. You'll have to deal with the tenant. So if they've got issues in the property, they'll be calling you direct. You'll be directly dealing with the tenant from that point. So that's let only. You then have rent and collect, or rent and collection, and that's where they will rent the property out, and they will also collect the rent for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But then the actual managing the property on a day-to-day basis with the tenant is still your responsibility. So you'll be managing the property on that basis. So they'll literally just be renting out, collecting the rent, and making sure that's getting to you. So that's the first two. And then the main one is fully managed. And that's what it basically it does what it says on the tin. They fully manage everything for you. So they rent the property out, as we just said. So they do the first part, which you said rent only. They also collect the rent. So they do rent and collect, and they manage it. So they are, like you said, they're the middleman between you and the tenant. Then you are completely hands off. You don't deal with the tenant. You don't get involved in that, and they manage everything for you. Any issues with the property, they're the first point of contact. They'll of course speak to you if anything needs dealing with in terms of financially, if you have to pay for stuff. Some actually have limits, so they might say, well, anything below £50 we won't even bother contacting you for. We'll just get it done, and you'll have that in a contract and agreed, and anything over they will then contact you. So that's the levels of the letting agents. And then, like you mentioned, you then go on to the short let side of things, and it does change slightly. And the main way it changes is they'll be operating the property in a different capacity for you. They'll be renting it on a nightly basis rather than your standard AST, short hold tenancy. So yeah, that's like you said on Airbnb.
Yeah, they'll list across all the platforms, won't they?
Yeah, the best way to liken it is a bit like a hotel.
Yeah.
So that's the best way to, if you're going to have a similarity for anybody that doesn't know the short let formula, it's like a hotel. They pay nightly. Your returns can definitely be more lucrative because you're paying a nightly rate. So your income is potentially higher depending on the occupancy rate. So that's a different conversation, that's short let. But what you will find, and we'll come on to this next in terms of the regular letting agent, is the fees are different.
Yes.
So going on to the fees side of things for short let, you deal with short let agents. What's the range in fees that you've experienced from a short let agent point of view?
Yep. So short term let, as you said, Toby, they do a hell of a lot more than a standard long term let. As you mentioned, all the listing platforms. You've got the cleaning as well, which a lot of people don't even realise. Check in, check out, exactly that. So there's a lot more involved. So you wouldn't expect it to be anywhere as low as where long-term lets are. So on a short-term let basis, normally a company or companies that we've either dealt with or know of, normally will charge anywhere from around 18% usually. Anywhere from, I've seen it as low as 15.
15, yeah.
But I would say, you want to make sure you're going with a good company. So I would say anywhere from 15 up to probably 20, because some probably are a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So I would say anywhere from 15 to 20, but obviously depends completely on the company and what service they're also bringing within that.
Yeah, because some will just literally just manage it. Quite basic.
Yeah, some will as well add additional costs for cleaning and things like that. So their base is just more so for listing it on the platforms, making sure obviously they don't cross over and book obviously double book on certain nights.
Yeah.
So these are all things that obviously you would have to speak to directly with a short-term let agency. But we're seeing much more of them in the market now, aren't we?
Yeah, it's become popular. Yeah, because of the lucrative returns that are on offer for investors,
Absolutely.
of course, and it's very, very popular. So fees then. So fees for a standard letting agent that rents out the property on a short hold tenancy, the standard rental, it's a long-term tenancy. They can charge anywhere depending on the level of service. So if you're looking for let only, as I said, they usually do a fixed fee for like the first year's rent or something like that. So it might be, I don't know, might be 5% up to 7% depending. Or the first year's rent is what they'll charge you. And that's it. They'll just charge that in one lump sum, done, and that's it. For rent and collect, again, you could be looking anywhere from 7 up to 8% potentially for rent and collect. And then, it could be slightly lower. So it depends how they structure it as well. They might do lower. They'll charge a front end fee and then a smaller ongoing fee as well. So it just depends there. But then a standard rental fully managed, you're probably looking on average around 10% plus VAT.
I was going to say,
So, some I have seen a little bit lower. If they're trying to grab hold of the market, they'll come in a little bit lower. But I'd always be cautious if they're charging lower fees. I would be skeptical about the level of service, because when it comes to fully managed, you need a high level. But so realistically, when we come to the different levels across the board, you'll be looking anywhere from 5 up to 10% on average, depending on the level of service. And funnily enough, I actually had a conversation with a fairly new letting agent in the industry, and they offer a fully managed service for 5% plus VAT.
It's impressive.
Very, very low. Very, very attractive. However, I would say the caveat to that is they aren't a standard letting agency. You would class them more as an online agent. Now, when we say online, so you've got high street is there's two brackets usually we put estate agents and letting agents in. We have high street and online. High street doesn't mean necessarily on the high street. What it basically means is they're a physical agent. They've probably got an office somewhere, office of some sort. You have a hybrid, which maybe is an office based, they'll be categorized around that, but they've probably got an office maybe in a serviced office block, something along those lines. And then you've got online, which is they're just online. So, and that's why they're cheaper, because they don't have as many overheads. But yeah, so that's why they're able to charge that much, is because they're online, and yeah, they have more systems processes. They use a lot of technology rather than human beings, rather than manpower, if you know what I mean. So they're able to charge a cheaper fee. So again, that's something to think about when you are picking an agent, whether you want a physical agent or more of online. You've got less of a human point of contact. It won't be as high level service, but you kind of get what you pay for there.
It comes down to, I guess, the landlord or landlady, whatever route they want to go down, right?
And then what would you think, or what do you come across as the objections to why someone wouldn't want to use a letting agent? Because that's one thing we want to come to a point today of, is having the listeners figure out, well, do I need or do I want a letting agent? But so what do you have, and here is the reasons for why someone wouldn't? I
would say a lot of the time it's just purely down to returns, thinking that
greedy letting agent is taking all my money.
Literally, to the
what
point,
are they doing?
To the point, literally, where people will, as you literally mentioned there, Toby, they think about the returns, and sometimes, obviously, if it's roughly around 10% fully managed, at first it can seem like, that could be quite expensive, and you probably add it up over the year. It can be expensive if you compare sometimes, but a lot of the time, I'm all for going for getting fully managed, and I mean, especially a lot of the time if you're busy. It's different though. I do believe it completely comes down to the personal situation. If you want and you've got time available to be able to do that.
So that's enough. So you've got expensive or eating into returns. Greedy letting agents. So that one you just mentioned, time. So people might say, I've got the time, I can do it. So that's another one. What else would be another thing where people say, I don't need a letting agent? Because location is one. Location is always one. So that kind of, they'll say, I live 2 streets down, or I live in the same area. Like, why do I need a letting agent? I'll manage it myself. So you have time, you have cost, you have location. So convenience, you may say to that. What else do people say? Or rather than just location, they think I can do it myself. It's not that hard a job.
Yeah, I agree. But I think in terms of that, I don't know, I guess because we've had a much more of an insight into the market and how things work. It can be very challenging dealing with it on your own. I know for sure a lot of people who have dealt with some nightmare tenants, and obviously when they're trying to do it on themselves as well as having a job and they haven't got as much time, it then becomes so time consuming. So
I think on those 4 points, sort of cost, time, locations / convenience, and DIY, you can probably flip it on its head for the advantages. So cost, so that it's costing you money to use a letting agent. What's the cost of not using a letting agent? So if you get your tenant in on the wrong basis, you don't give them the right forms when they enter the property, you don't get a gas safety certificate, you don't get the right electrical certificate, you're not meeting the right regulations, you're not doing anything properly. Any of those things can be a massive cost to you. Firstly, if you don't give the renter's guide when they first move in, and they don't have gas safety, etc., that automatically gives them the right to their deposit back. If they are a tenant that's obviously quite clued on, they will know that and they will use that. So that's a jeopardy. So that could cost you, if they damage the property and you can't get the deposit back, that's that. You might not reference them. So a letting agent will be referencing them.
Another cost again.
Another cost again. But the cost of not referencing them
could be
you get a tenant that can't afford it. They don't start paying. They have a bad history, wherever it may be. So to summarise that, the cost that you incur for using a letting agent, for my personal opinion anyway, far outweighs the cost of not using one when you've got an issue. Because, not saying that you will have an issue, but I always use the way of wording that. the chances of an issue are usually quite small, depending on the property and where it is, etc. Quite small. But then the effects of that, when it does go wrong, are massive.
Could be massively
and that's
costly.
where it's massive cost. So that's that. Then if we flip time, so, I've got spare time on my hands. Well, have you got enough time to deal with the property when there's issues and stuff? Could your time be better well spent? And that letting agent will then give you that time back. So you then get even more time from that. So I would be like, well, actually, no, I'd rather have more of my time personally rather than dealing with a property and the tenant and having that. So you've got those two. Location, I would say you could flip that on its head, I suppose, in terms of, I live nearby, but I would see that as a disadvantage. If you live nearby and it's on your doorstep, that's constantly an ag and a hassle for you to deal with because it's on your doorstep. You can't get away from it. There's no...
Tenants can come and knock on your door.
They know where you live. If you've got that relationship, they're going to come knock on your door. If they got your number, well, I know you live down the road, you can come today.
Text you at all different times of night.
100%. So that side of things, and then you've got the barrier there as a letting agent where they won't contact you. Letting agent deal with that. So that's location. And then DIY, I can DIY an extension of my house, but it'll probably fall down in about 2 days. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you can do it well. So I think a lot of people think, I can do that myself. What's so hard? Find a tenant, whack them in, get the rental income. I'm making much money. Thank you very much.
Well, the saying is in general, isn't it? It's if you do it cheap, you end up paying twice a lot of the time, which I think does cover a lot of that, whether you're getting in, as you said, the DIY side of things, you're getting in builders to maybe fix something up, whereas you thought it might be a cheaper route to do it yourself. And similar to doing the letting agents, you might have thought it would be cheaper to just do your own reference checks and not have to pay that money.
Well, like we just said,
expensive.
Exactly. The cost can be massive. So, look, this isn't saying for everybody, but I usually say, look, have you got a full-time job? Yes, use a letting agent. Have you got spare time? No, use a letting agent. Do you want to deal with hassle, potentially on a regular basis, and have to deal with your tenant on a one-to-one basis? No, get a letting agent, because I think people's perception until they do it is like, no, it's fine. Don't worry. Like, won't be an issue. I actually have a story. So we actually had a letting agent on this one. So a property that I've got in Leeds, we had an issue. We converted the basement was a conversion. We then refurbed it and we put a new kitchen and everything in the basement. And when the tenants moved in, there hadn't been some damp-proof coursing done in one part of the basement, and it was like a storage area. And that meant that we started to see damp come in the property while the tenants were in there. Now, my friend who I've got the property with, he was like, look, I'm driving that way anyway. He's like, I'll go check it out, just see if there's anything we can do in the meantime, and I'll go there, just have a look around. We were going to get someone out anyway, but he's like, look, I'll go there and just see what's so there. And he was like, and he's actually a gas engineer, funny enough. So he's like, I'll just go and do the certificate at the same time. So I was like, yeah, brilliant. So he's gone there, he's gone in, and he's met the tenant. And obviously he's introduced himself to the tenant. They've got chat in. Bearing in mind, we've got a letting agent. We're paying fully managed fee to. We actually pay them 11% plus VAT. I didn't need to ask them for a discount, actually. No, I'm joking. They're well worth their money in most scenarios. But so he introduced himself, exchanged numbers, said, any issues on this, let me know, etc., etc. Lo and behold, what then starts happening is the tenant starts messaging him like, we've got this problem, and he's going, well, no, like, I just meant about maybe like the damp or something, like the boiler, like I'd never said it before. And we'd be like, go speak to the agent. Yeah, okay. Speak to the agent, come straight back to us. We haven't heard this, we haven't heard that. And it got a little bit sour because he starts like basically getting a bit upset, like, look, we were doing everything we can. We put a dehumidifier in there. We halved their rent as well. For a few months as well, just while we were getting all the works done. We got the works done straight away. We're really on it. But he started to get some really, like, not nasty, but not very nice texts, like basically moaning and whinging and stuff like that. And look, we get it, that's their property, so obviously he was very sympathetic, but this should have been aimed at the letting agent. Again, it was stuff that was out of our control, waiting for contractors, and that turned into him realising, because I'd kind of said to him, don't give your number, like, don't do that, like, that's what we've got a letting agent for. And he met her, and at first nice, thought, no, I'll help him out. And that's an example of, Yeah, and again, we're very friendly, amenable people. Like, we always want to help the tenants, hence why we acted on that very quickly and what we did. But they don't always see it that way. A tenant, again, because they've got an issue, they want it sorted.
Yeah.
So they're going to hammer you. And I get that, but that's what I'm saying. You don't want that. Unless you want to deal with it and you've got the shoulders and the stomach to deal with it, it's not good. And that was, that was not good.
Well, funny enough, obviously we're in Dubai recently.
Yeah.
So I stayed in an Airbnb whilst I was out there for a couple of weeks. And we went through an Airbnb, but there was an actual management company fully in place that was obviously doing short-term lets, like we mentioned. It was obviously fully operating like that. So obviously had the point of contact. When I met someone there, they handed over the keys, did the whole process. It was really, really smooth, lovely apartment. And around the second week, obviously we had around a week left, and I get into the lift and there's a lady that comes from literally the place next door, and she quickly hops in the lift and she's like, "Oh, do you like the place?" And we was obviously like just being friendly. Yes, it's obviously being really nice. And she's like, "Oh yeah, I own that." And that's one of the things. It's on her doorstep. We are literally the neighbour.
Yeah.
She doesn't deal with the property herself. I was like, I don't blame you.
So you could have knocked on her door and be like, "Excuse me, this
now I knew I was knocking on the door. No, I was joking there. But to be fair, it was a lovely property, great. The actual management company were really good. But that's a prime example of someone had it on their doorstep.
Yeah.
And for the sake of not wanting the hassle,
still had a management
company. It was next door.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I suppose, look, we spoke about why you should use a letting agent, or why we think you should use a letting agent. But how would you go about picking a letting agent? Because they're not all good. Like a lot of things.
In most industries, aren't there? There's always going to be good and bad, for sure.
But so what would you look for when picking a letting agent to try and really determine if they're good or not?
I think it's definitely good to have some feelers out there in terms of having general conversations with them. I'd be looking up their reviews online for sure.
Be careful.
I wouldn't read into it 100% because you are going to get a hell of a lot of negative ones.
Yeah. Usually tenants.
Yeah. But yeah, I would still, that's me personally, I would still look into reviews. I would also, if you know anyone, a lot of the time, letting agents personally that we know are off of referrals. Like a lot of the time, if it's a good company, everyone in the area or friends and family would generally know that. So I would say referrals, having a little dig into them online. I'd generally have some conversations with them, ask them general questions about how they operate, kind of what's their standard kind of practice, what's their processes, how do they operate with a landlord or landlady, and what kind of communication they're doing, because I feel like some are very good at reporting and some literally won't tell you anything, only as and when. Sometimes you'll have to do the chasing, even though. So look, as you said, Toby, is there's a lot involved. I mean, anything else you'd add that you'd look for?
I think what you just said is correct. So like, do some research, have conversations with them, see what's on their books as well, because see if they've got similar properties to yourself. Because if they have, and they're renting them out on a regular basis, that's a good sign in terms of performance. Doesn't necessarily mean they're the best agent, but performance-wise. But do the digging. I would probably say as well, like when you are speaking to them, look for red flags. I had one letting agent that I spoke to, and when I was renting out one of my properties in Leeds, and I think it was just when we first bought it, and we needed a handrail, like to go up the stairs. It's a requirement, like you need it in there.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think I brought it up to him because another agent brought it up to me and said, "Oh yeah, I know I need a handrail," and he was a bit like, "Nah, not that important. You don't have to. Like you're supposed to." And I was a bit like, "Okay." I was like, "That's
not,
how
you do business.
Not a good sign." If you're kind of saying to me, "I don't," because that's the tenants that are going to be living in there. That's for them. It's for their safety. It's also to cover myself as well, to make sure I'm up to regulations, up to scratch, and insurance is covered. And when he said that was a red flag, so maybe trying to bend the rules or skip what's needed. Although they may think they're doing you a favour, like, you might save me some money putting up a handrail, but I don't like that sort of operation because, again, I want all my properties to be fit for purpose for the tenant, to make sure it's up to the correct standards and rent it out in the best way. If the
tenant was to have an accident...
That's on my head.
Exactly.
It's on my head, exactly. So I look for that. Any red flags where they're trying to cut corners and maybe not being as honest, that's what I'd look for. I had literally that same property. I had another agent, and they said you needed it, and we hadn't done it. I think by the time we'd found we found the tenant very quickly, and they wanted a moving date, and they were like, The agent was like, look, we can't let them move in. I was like, why? They went, you still haven't got the handrail done. And I was like, oh, okay, can you find someone to do it ASAP? And they're like, yeah, don't worry, we'll get some. Because I was getting quotes and stuff and it was just taking ages. And then
that's something as well, to be fair, that we didn't even highlight is
true, their connections.
Having good builders or people who
on their books.
On maintenance, for sure. That's a big one.
That's true, actually. So I suppose that's another one to add in there. But so they did that letting agent wouldn't let.
And also, as you said, how quick can they operate and do that? Because as you said, that was costing you money not having people in there.
Exactly, and they saw it. I mean, they're still my letting agent to today. So I really like. So looking for red flags like that. Make sure they're operating honestly, I suppose. But that's a great one as well. Having the sort of connections or the network that they have, especially when you're investing remotely like we do, that they have people on the ground that they can just, okay, here you go, don't worry, we've got the team sorted, but also they're not trying to rip you off.
Because
some agents will. They'll be trying to rip you off. I know there's some companies out there that will be incentivized, not the companies, but the property managers to try and get you to do add-ons. Like, I remember when electrical safety certificates started to become more apparent, but weren't legislation, not a legal requirement, and they were incentivized to call landlords and be like, "Oh, look, you need an electrical safety certificate." Kind of erred on the side of, it's a requirement, but not saying it's not a legal requirement, but it's good to have one. And they're incentivized to do that and kind of scaremonger landlords.
It would have worked on a lot of people.
And it did, they made a big, and they were charging, so they would have the electrician go out and they would charge on top of that. So again, just being cautious of that. Just make sure they're not trying to.
And also as well, getting photos of the works that have been done. Need to keep a record of what's been done, because you don't know what standard that, especially if, as you said, Toby, if you're not local to there, you need to know they've gone in and done a good job.
Responsive as well, actually. So how responsive are on the phone? If you're trying to get hold of your letting agent when you're trying to rent the property out and they're not coming back to you, they're not giving you feedback, they're not saying why it hasn't rented out yet. As a red flag, I would literally be like, okay, don't worry, I'm going to get someone else on it. So they're the things that I would look at when picking a letting agent. Unfortunately, if it's a new area that you're going into, a new location, there can be a bit of trial and error. Like I've been lucky enough to find good ones where I've been off the bat. Haven't had to swap over yet. So that's been fine. But trial and error sometimes does take place. But act quickly. Don't let it get too far down the line and then think, oh no, I can't do this. Like I said, if during the marketing process you're seeing red flags and it's not going well, cut it off. Get another letting agent on it before you get the tenant in.
Even though, as you said, as we both mentioned now, like, even though it might cost you a little bit of money to swap over, it could be worth it in the long run, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's pretty much, without going, I mean, I could talk probably all day about letting agents, but look, we both rent out properties, okay? So we've dealt with letting agents. We're talking from experience here. And look, my opinion, and this isn't for everybody, but I'm just giving my personal opinion, is a letting agent is definitely worth their weight in gold. Like, with all the rules, regulations, laws, everything around renting a property, it's impossible. If you've got a full-time job or you're not working in the industry, it's impossible to know all those and know the new ones coming out and the new ones in the pipeline and be able to rent out your property properly. Mm-hmm. Even if you are able to do that and then trying to maintain it, stay on top of it, have that contact with the tenant, it's just not worth it. So that fee you pay them, in my opinion, I think it's more than fair. Some I don't think charge enough. I don't think a lot of people understand a lot of work that they do for the property, even on, like I said, the property manager, the account side. So my one gives me a statement at the end of the year and all that, which they do. Statement, I can see what's gone in and what I've spent for them, what's gone out. So from that point of view, I definitely think that, for me personally, 100% of the time, I always say, and I think I've mentioned this podcast before, I've got one. I don't live there now, but for many years I lived there, but I still don't live too far from it. I had one, I'd say on my doorstep, but it was in the same town as I was, so it was literally like a 5-10 minute drive to the property, and I still had it fully managed. And I work in property, I still had it fully managed, had a letting agent paying the top price because I don't want to deal with it. to me, it's an investment. It's a business. I want to be hands off. It's passive.
You saw who moved in. He looked like The Rock, didn't he?
Yeah, he was massive. And I thought, you know what? You are going to
I'm not dealing with that.
If you have to knock on my door, I said, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. If you want me to extend into the roof, I'll do whatever you tell me. You just say the word. No, but yeah, that's for me. I want passive hands off.
Yeah.
I've got busy life elsewhere. I've got kids that are way more demanding.
Yeah. Takes up a lot of your time.
Yeah, exactly. They're the worst kind of tenants, your kids, because they don't even pay you rent.
Absolute liberties.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to start charging. I mean, the eldest one's 9 now, so I reckon I could start charging her. Yeah, she gets enough at Christmas and her birthdays. I don't see why. It's a good idea. I might have to start putting a contract to her and see. If not, she can sling her up, mate. Go live with Nan and Grandad.
Or she needs to get a job here.
But yeah, no, anything you want to sort of end on?
No, I'd say I would honestly just repeat what you said, Toby. I'm all for letting agents. I think they play a massive part in the process in terms of, especially for a lot of people nowadays, as you said, like we haven't got the time to be able to go and do things.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, I've always been a big believer in anything I do that you want to pay for it once, even if it is a bit more expensive. So I would happily pay a bit more of a higher cost rather than try and manage it or deal with it myself, especially if you're nowhere near it. I mean, even if you are, as you said, like you were, and even the lady in Dubai, like I'd still be doing the exact same thing. Yeah. I wouldn't want to deal with it myself. So, if you find a good letting agent, hold on to him.
Exactly. Well, let's wrap it up there then. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time, guys.